Alright, so I'll just dive in. The first thing I want to do is find a reference image, so I googled Destiny door, and I'm grabbing this guy and downloading it, so you can do that by right-clicking and save image as. And then in Blender, I'm coming down to background images, clicking the checkbox and adding the image from my desktop. And I believe it's called Max Res Default. And 1.5 to go into front orthographic. And now I just need to position this behind the scene. So I will bring it up like so. And it's not a perfectly angled image, so it's not going to be exactly lining up because you can see this corner is higher than this corner. And we could try to rotate it, but I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to do the right side and mirror it across. So I'm taking my default cube, again in front ortho, and then I'm going to hit W, merge at center. And I want to make sure that my object is centered right here. And I can actually hit Alt-G to center it at the world center. So that I'll set this to 0, 0, 0. And from there, in edit mode, I'm just going to position this over here. Now I can zoom in, E, E, E. Alright, so we've got one side. And then I'm going to move the cursor to the world center, so that's Shift S and cursor to center. And I'm going to use that as my pivot point. So I'm going to come down to this box and choose 3D cursor. And then E, left click, S. And now things scale a little bit more conveniently for us, except at the top where it's going way too high. So then I'll hit S, Z, scale it down. And I can hide it with H, and then Alt-H to bring it back. And we can bring these down, maybe to about there. Alright, so now we want to mirror this. So I'm going to come over to my modifier tab and add a mirror modifier. And you can tell it's breaking right here, so I'm going to grab these two vertices, enable clipping, and then just push these together with G. Like so. Alright, this is coming along pretty nicely so far. So 1 to jump back to front view. And now we want to create this piece. So I'm just going to take one of these vertices and then hit Shift D to duplicate it. And then I'm going to hit P to separate selection. And then I'm just going to, whoops, not sure what I hit there. Back in object mode, I'm going to hit A to deselect everything, and then click on this cube. Tab into edit mode, grab that vertex again, that vertex, and then just start extruding it down along this line. And since we separated this from a parent that had a mirror modifier, the mirror was duplicated onto this object as well. Now I'm just going to reposition these. Alright, so now we need to actually fill this out with a face. There's a few different ways we could do that, but I'm just going to hit Control L, and then E to extrude. And I'm just going to move it up like this. And since we have clipping enabled, it just snaps together at the center. And I'll extrude this like so. Alright, so we have the whole top of the door now. And there's a little bit of weird overlap there, but we can deal with that later. So now we can create the bottom door. So I'm going to grab this point, Control right click up here to get those, Shift D to duplicate, 1 for front view, and then E to move these down. And I'm just going to put them, I think I'll just manually reposition these. And I will do S, Z, and scale them down like that. S, Z, 0. Alright, now I'm going to take the whole door frame, grab all the vertices, and extrude them forward along the y-axis. Now I can tell just from looking at it that the shading is wrong. So I'm going to hit A and Control N, and that flipped the direction of the normals. And then I'm going to add a subdivision surface to this guy. And Control R to create a ring loop. Same thing on the bottom. Control R. There we go. And then I'll take the door, and I'm just going to break off the bottom. So I'm taking one vertex, Control L, and then P to separate selection. So now we have the top piece of the door and the bottom piece. And the normals are backward on this guy, so Control N. And they still seem backward, but this is also perfectly flat, so we need to extrude this forward. Control L, Control N. And if I add a subdivision surface to the bottom, let's see what happens. Whoops. Subdivision surface. Now we're not getting a break between the doors, and we want the door to be able to separate right there. So what I'm going to do, and I'm not sure what exactly the correct workflow here would be, because we're going to want to modify this door and add more geometry. But when we don't want to do anything that's going to make it too hard to separate this later. So I'm going to disable clipping and move these apart. And I need the whole door, so that's Control L. And I think I'll just move them apart slightly for now. And actually, you know what? We could just work on one side. Why don't we do that for now? And then later we can apply the mirror modifier and then break them into two separate objects. I think that's the most efficient workflow. So the next thing I'm going to do is, if I hide everything, you can see there's this kind of like circular piece right here. So for that, I'm going to add a circle to the scene, scale it down, RX90, move it up, and then just kind of reshape it so that it's a little bit closer to the reference. So we need to scale it out on the x-axis. And take these points at the bottom, scale them out. I'm going to hit O to enable proportional editing. And I think that's pretty close. So the next thing I want to do is tab into object mode. And I have my circle selected. And then I'm going to shift right click on the door. And then I'm going to hit 1 for front view. And then I'm going to hit tab. So the order there was a little bit important. So circle is selected first, then the door is selected, and then you hit tab. And now I'm going to hit K and knife project. And we just essentially projected this cut onto the object. So now we can delete our circle if we want to. And then I'm going to go into edge selection mode, so that's Control Tab, Edge, grab these edges, and X, dissolve edges. Face selection mode, and I'm just going to extrude this out a tiny bit, ever so slightly. And then I'm going to go into edge selection mode and take all these edges and bevel them. And it's not happy with that, so there, that's fine. Alright, so if we look at the reference image again, I'm going to hit A to select everything, H to hide everything. So we got this piece, we got the main door frame. We could create these circles, but I think those fall off when the door becomes unlocked, so they're not really part of the door anyway. So I'm going to Alt-H, bring everything back, and I think we're ready to start animating this. So I'm going to reapply the Mio modifier, and let me look at this one more time. Does this have any depth? Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think we're ready. So I'm just going to apply the Mio modifier, and then hit Control L, and you can see when I do that now, this is all one giant piece of geometry because the mirror modifier connected everything. And so rather than doing it that way and then having to manually break them apart, we can just actually separate this a tiny bit and then apply the mirror modifier. And now we've got two separate pieces of geometry. So I can push them back together, and then I'm going to hit P and separate selection. And now we actually have two completely separate objects. And that's going to make it much easier to animate. So I'm going to cut this video off here, and then in the next video I'll show you guys how to animate this.